If bowel movements could talk, one of the things about having a bowel movement is it is really real world data, and it's immediate data and information for you. And for that, we believe it's so very important to take a brief second and look at your bowels and look after having a bowel movement so you can capture some of that information and have a better understanding of what's really going on inside. So let's talk about what is your normal. Now, when you're going to the restroom, are you relaxed? Do you find that you're relaxed, or are you pushing? Because naturally, it should really be a passive movement. You shouldn't have much pushing involved. If so, that could signify that we have some more stress indicated in the pelvic floor. One of the main goals of the pelvic floor is to really support the bowels and the bladder and genitalia. And if the pelvic floor becomes too tight and too compressed, then you might have to push, if you will, in order to overcome that pressure. That, with a long period of time, can actually lead to some dysfunctions in the pelvic floor, which could become more problematic when trying to really learn how to use it correctly. Another thing you want to think about is, does your stool, does it look the same each time, or do you find that it varies a lot? And if so, are you finding anything that is maybe consistently making it vary? Also, how long does it take you to go? Are you one of those that it takes a couple minutes, or is it, a process that could take you a little bit longer? Are you finding you're having to sit down for a while in order to quote unquote finish off and spend a little extra time? Or are you able to really just go about your business, be done, and walk away real quick? Another thing that we want to make note of is, are your knees above your hips? We say this because all too often we find that as people get older, they tend to get toilets that are raised a little bit more. As a toilet is raised, our knees tend to be closer to the ground and our hips are higher up. The thing is, this actually will place more stress on the pelvic floor and tighten those muscles up. Meaning, when you do go to use the restroom, you may have to find yourself pushing just to overcome this stress. For that reason, we really do recommend for the majority of people to have a squatty potty. If you're unfamiliar with a squatty potty, it's this device right here that slides just underneath your toilet. It's very, very economical, easy to have, and easy to put in every single toilet around the house. If somebody, for whatever reason, chooses not to use one, it simply slides underneath the toilet and doesn't take up any extra space. However, it will take a lot of stress and pressure off the pelvic floor, allowing you to have healthier poops. So what we want to talk about, though, is, what does your poop really say? So here we have is what is known as the Bristol stool chart. This is a very important chart that we want you to get familiar with because, as I mentioned, your bowels give you real world data in real time. And it's one of the greatest pieces of information that we can have. Now, naturally, we should have about 1 to 2 bowel movements per day. Now, that really is going to change person to person. The big thing we want to note is, are you consistent? Some people we find are just very consistent. They tend to have one first thing in the morning after they have a cup of coffee. It lets them go, and then it kind of cleans them out, if you will. And others are a bit more irregular. But we also want to make note of the color, right? Because color is important. Naturally, your stool should be brown in nature, and that really comes from dead blood cells. As far as the consistency, as I mentioned, we want to make sure it's about the same time each day. But another thing is, with the difference in the stool chart, are you noticing that some foods are tending to irritate it more? Maybe after you have some food, that it pushes you to go to the restroom and you have to, expel yourself. These are all things to make note of, because that is an internal sign that your body is rejecting whatever that you're putting in. All right, but let's take a look at the Bristol stool chart here. And what we want to make note of is, what type do you really have? So type 3 and type 4 are more classified as those normals. Remember, we're aiming to have, or the general consensus is, about 1 to 2 bowel movements per day. Now, with each bowel movement, we really tend to find that people tend to have a 1 to 2 logs, if you will, with a rough diameter similar to a circle that you would make with your index finger and your thumb. So if you want to do that real quick, go ahead and think of that. Now that you've made that index finger and thumb, that circle, that's really what, is classified as that type 3 or even that type 4. But really going away from that up towards type 2 and type 1 is going to let us know that you're constipated. And there's many reasons you can be constipated, some of which being medications, right? It's not uncommon that medications do increase constipation levels. One reason for constipation is not getting enough water in your diet, and therefore you don't have enough water to propel your stool throughout your bowels. And what happens, because it's not propelling and propagating that stool throughout, what it's doing is taking its time, if you will, in your intestines, and it's going at a slower pace. Therefore, it's sucking out the water and the fluids, making it more constipated. The problem is it's much harder to be able to pass this. And this is where we find people are really having to push, if you will, which is going to make it much more challenging on the pelvic floor. Now, on the same token, we can also find that you can have these small pellets, if you will, that are hard and separate little lumps because the pelvic floor doesn't want to relax and open up. So essentially your body's trying to overcome that pressure, and the muscle, which is called your puborectalis, really doesn't want to open up enough. Therefore, it's quickly closing off and creating those small little pellets. Now, as we go away from that type 3 and 4 towards the bottom where we have type 5, 6, and 7, what we notice with type 5 is where it's an indication that we're lacking fiber. Now, fiber is one of those things that I find so many people across the world really are lacking fiber. And one way to know that is if it's really soft blobs with clear cut out edges. That's really a good sign and indication. So if you find yourself where it's more on the softer end, but not consistent, right? Think of that fiber as maintaining that block, if you will, right? Maintaining that solid action. So if you find yourself having one of those, that's probably a sign that you're lacking some fiber. And then going further onto that into 6 and 7 is really just some signs of inflammation. Again, that could sometimes just be your body quickly trying to get something out of your body that it does not agree with, and really just pushing it through. So we didn't want to go too much into this, but this is a great reference that we're going to go ahead and add into the app so you can reference anytime that you do go to the bathroom. It really is something that you should just look at real quickly, take a brief look, and just take a look and see, hey, what is my body telling me right now? And if it's telling you you're lacking fiber, maybe opt in for some of those more fibrous foods. If it tells you you're closer on to the top end of 1 and 2, maybe you're not drinking enough water that you need. Okay, so just use this piece of information right now and just start gathering that data every single time.